Hello again, friends. Welcome back. My name's Oscar Montes Higa. I'm a certified wine and spirits instructor for the International Wine and Spirits Guild. And thanks for joining me here at the Booze Library of Uncorked Vintage Academia again for Whiskey Wednesday. Thanks for joining me. I hope you're having a good Whiskey Wednesday. Today, I'm going to bring you something that is just actually recently released in the market, especially here in Central Texas, where the whiskey hails from. And there's no doubt that you're going to start seeing it in other markets outside the state as well. Balcones Distilling Company is, fairly large operation in the sense that they do reach other markets. They don't stay necessarily local. So that's a good thing if you're watching from out of state. So I hope you get your hands on something like this if you can. From Balcones, from many years ago, they released something somewhat unique in our market in general, in the US market, and that was Baby Blue. Baby Blue, 100% blue corn whiskey. And recently, in the last few years, they actually released True Blue, which was the Baby Blue that was, say, cask strength, barrel proof. A lot more aging, of course, in the True Blue versus the Baby Blue, which is, only slightly aged. But today, the new variation and recently released is going to be the Big Baby. And Big Baby is a straight corn whiskey bottled in bond, and that was actually aged in tequila barrels. So it was all of its maturation happened in tequila barrels or ex-tequila barrels. And they really just released it earlier this year. We're talking about just a couple months. The batch number is BBBIB 221. So the first batch of 2022, Big Blue bottle in bond, and it was bottled, the date is 1/14/22. So January 14 is when they bottled. They definitely let it rest in the bottle for a couple months, and really local retailers here in Central Texas are just starting to get their batches. I think Balcones actually did a party release really just a couple weeks ago, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, just excited. So obviously, you've seen a few other whiskey reviews in the channel. What differentiates in the United States a bourbon versus a corn whiskey, which is really important to talk about? You really have to decide what you're making beforehand, before you put anything into a barrel. And even before then, if you're not really thinking about your mash bill, you really need to think about what grains you're putting into your spirit. Because technically, you can definitely make a bourbon with over 80% corn in your recipe, but that still doesn't make it a corn whiskey. You can, at that point, you can definitely still decide in your recipe at 80% corn whether you still want to be a bourbon or you want to be a corn whiskey. What really detaches the two of them apart is that bourbon must spend touching wood that's been charred, new charred wood or containers, oak containers. What makes corn whiskey very distinct in the matter is that corn whiskey can never touch new charred wood. It must be unaged, or if it is aged, then you need to age it in something fairly neutral. If it's new, it must not be charred. Basically an older barrel or a new barrel that is not charred, which is very distinct than bourbon. Bourbon definitely is distinguished by the new charred character on those barrels. So even if you decided to make a bourbon with over 80% or at 80 or over 80% corn whiskey in your mash, you had to had thought about that in your aging procedure, your maturation. So anyway, this means that this corn whiskey spend time in the tequila barrels, which obviously are not new, they're not charred, etc. So that is also a mash bill of over 80%, in case you haven't already guessed, versus bourbons that bourbons can be 51, 55, 60%, 70%, 75% corn, and they don't need to be over 80% corn to be called bourbons. But corn whiskey must be over 80% or at 80. Anyway, what bottling bond means? It means that it was also bottled at 50% ABV. And it's in this particular case, in this big baby, the bottling statement on the back says that it was aged at least for 5 years in oak, of course. But bottling bond really only requires 4 years minimum of maturation. So Balcones definitely went an extra step to age it at the very least a minimum of 5 years. And that's what we have. Bottling Bond Act of 1897 is what it was passed, and it tells us that any spirit bottled under that premise of a bottling bond labeling, it was made in one distilling season by one distillery, and it was of course aged in a bonded warehouse, federally recognized as a bonded warehouse, for a minimum of 4 years, and bottled in a glass at exactly 50% ABV. It cannot be less, it cannot be more, just exactly at 50 ABV. And again, the minimum standard for bottling bond is 4 years, but you can see bottling bond for 5 years, for 10 years, for 15 years, etc. But basically, we got the definition of what we're tasting mostly out of the way. We have a corn whiskey that was a minimum of 80% corn. It was not aged in a new charred barrel. In this case, we know it was mature in ex-tequila barrels. We know that it is a minimum of 5 years of age. We know that it is at 50% ABV and made by one distillery in one distilling season. And I'm excited to try it. I already gave you the batch number, ABV, age, percentage, etc. Let's give this a whirl. We're tasting neat, of course, and the spirit is clear. The color is a light canary gold with a canary transition, and a transition that is pale color to the edge. My nasal impact is both drying and prickling right about the same time. As my nose starts to prickle, it starts drying, and I do need to pull it away because that drying sensation is a little aggressive, but mostly drying and prickling. On the nose, I have honey, chamomile, perfume of something like very, very dried flowers, dried potpourri, dry sunflowers. The raw material shows like butterscotch, toffee, blue corn dust, meaning blue corn grist or grits, if you want to say. Just milled corn, blue corn. There's also like a charred orange zest quality. There's vanilla and menthol, and there's also something like a very faint hint of something that reminds me of rye malt. And besides the rye malt, there's also a light influence of sweet potato. But the predominant smells are the sunflower, the honey, the pepper, butterscotch, menthol, toffee, vanilla, the orange, and the blue corn. Its production intensity is adequate and simple. The maturation intensity is adequate and complex. Its length is average and ordinary character. Ready for a taste. The mouthfeel effect is coating primarily with small highlights of warming and a little bit of astringency. It's very pleasant as it just coats your mouth. It slightly warms it up and slightly lets you know it's there with a little bit of astringency, but mostly coating. The alcohol and glycerol are smooth. The body is medium full body, and the alcohol is sufficient. At 50%, this feels very, very well integrated, very, very balanced. The primary taste is both sweet and sour, with a little bit of highlights of bitterness, a little bit of highlights of savoriness, and even a little bit of a highlight of saltiness or salinity. And there's a little bit of everything, but mostly sweet and sour kind of intermingling together primarily. The smoothness of the alcohol itself on the mouthfeel is oily and buttery. So there's this nice mash of this creamy butteriness, but also some slickness like oil. So oily, buttery. And a lot of the flavors are confirmed from the nose. The flavors are there from the toffee, the caramel, the butterscotch, the buttered popcorn, like salted buttered popcorn. And that is 100% the raw material that we have. You do get hints of peppercorn and hints of the orange zest and hints of ginger, thyme, mint, honey. And I would not say that the palate may be not as complex as the nose, but it is straightforward and it is very indicative of both raw material and the maturation process. The intensity of the flavor is concentrated, and again, even though it's not a very complex flavor character, it is concentrated. You do get a lot of flavor, even though the flavor is not complex. So quite concentrated with a slight complexity, harmonious balance. Everything is actually very nicely integrated. The aftertaste, the aftertaste is pleasant and the finish is long, which leads me to my overall impression of calling this very good to excellent. Definitely towards the excellent side of things, because everything is in harmony, everything is balanced, everything is integrated. The one thing that doesn't really make me want to put it at 100% excellent, without any doubt, it's the fact that I miss complexity on the palate. I have a slight desynchronization of a few more aromatics that I get on the nose that don't translate to my palate. But that may just need, more air, more bottle time, who knows. But this is very good towards excellent. I like that it really shows raw material, the blue corn, and it shows the elevage, the tequila maturation in barrels. So it is very well done. I hope you can find it in your shelves. Pairings for this whiskey for me, as I try it, I can definitely picture myself eating a corn-centric salad, a corn salad. Some pasta and rice dishes would work really nicely. If you include a tropical, like a mango, slight pineapple, pico de gallo, or mango or pineapple sauces in your dishes, whether you're cooking chicken or pork, that may work really nicely. If you have a sausage that includes cheese, a cheese sausage, that would be a nice pairing. And lastly, fried chicken. I think fried chicken would be a nice complement to this whiskey as well. So, get your hands on them if you can. Beautiful line. You can try a whole line of blue corn whiskies from Balcones. And thanks for watching. Please leave me a note. Leave me any questions you may have about whiskey, about any spirit, about cocktails or wine, or anything else at all. But I do thank you for watching. Please subscribe and like and share. That helps me a lot. And I will catch you next time. Happy Whiskey Wednesday. Cheers.